Could a new constellation of European leadership help secure a lasting peace in Ukraine? Recently, the leaders of Germany, France, Poland, and the UK have been stepping up pressure on Vladimir Putin with a symbolic joint visit to Kyiv, underscoring their resolve. The new German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, French President Emmanuel Macron, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, and Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk are together demanding that Russia come to the negotiating table. Now, their ultimatum for Moscow to accept a 30-day ceasefire came to nothing, but what else can they do to pressure Putin? This week, we're taking a look at the potential for Ukraine peace talks. How powerful is Europe's new alliance? I'm Claire Richardson in Berlin. Thank you so much for joining us. We have a fantastic panel for you this week. Joining us is Daniel Brössler with the Süddeutsche Zeitung, Miriam Kosmehl, senior expert in the Bertelsmann Stiftung's Europe program specializing in Eastern Europe, Kate Brady, reporter for the Washington Post in Germany. And joining us today remotely from Riga, we have Alexei Yusupov, head of the Russia program at the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung. So a very warm welcome to you all. Thank you so much for making the time. A lot of questions to unpack here. Kate, perhaps we could jump right in with you. Trump, the U.S. president, he has not ended the war in 100 days, in his first 100 days, not in the 24 hours of taking office, as he famously promised. So the question is, can the Europeans perhaps succeed where he has not?
There's absolutely opportunity there for that to happen, but I think they still absolutely need the US to be on board. It's what's also clear as well is that, there is this kind of growing skepticism that we're seeing from the Trump administration, from Trump himself now, towards Russia, that, the original tactics of these deals, the kind of dodgy deals really that we saw being done between Moscow and the US, that's also just not working. And so, that is an opportunity now for the Europeans to really pull Trump back into the boat, and so that they can find some common ground, especially when it comes to reaching, sanctions that are really going to affect Moscow in this next round of sanctions, and eventually, hopefully, bring Putin to the table.
Yeah, and finding that unity is such a key point for European leaders. Miriam, there does appear to be right now a growing and strengthening alliance among European leaders taking form. What has changed in this current international political dynamic that is allowing for us to see this converge?
The major change I see in Germany's initiative to really reach out to its largest neighbors, Poland on the one hand and France on the other hand, and to take the UK along and to actually go to Kyiv on one of the first days in office, to go together, to reach out to the US together. This, I agree, is a very good reset and momentum to develop things further now. It is just a start, but a good start.
Yeah. Now, we've mentioned the 30-day ceasefire they were hoping for. The ultimatum came and went. Alexei, partially in response to European pressure, we did have Putin proposing a meeting for direct negotiations with Ukraine. There'd been some hope that this could be a moment, that we saw some movement. As we record right now, it does seem, though, both Putin and Trump have indicated they will not be attending this meeting in Turkey. What would you say are the implications of that more widely?
Well, I think we have to manage expectations also on the European side. So the meetings and the beginning talks would never be there to achieve a breakthrough straight away. That's just not the dynamic and the mechanics of how these negotiations can work, although higher leadership will be necessary to actually avoid or resolve backlog or even, dead ends. But at the moment, it's actually the re-engagement, which has value in itself. And I think that we just need to understand that negotiations and ongoing fighting can continue for quite a significant time. If you look at other international conflicts, be it the Vietnam War, be it Korea, be it something else, negotiations have always taken longer than just the initial meetings. So we cannot tell at the moment whether this is the decisive moment or not, but it's actually a hopeful moment, I would say.
All right, a hopeful moment. Let's ask Daniel about that. As well as Miriam's mentioned, the new German government that's currently in place is an important factor here. We have the newly instated chancellor, Friedrich Merz, and you reported on his first phone call with the United States president, reporting that Trump apparently did signal some kind of willingness to cooperate with the Europeans. Is that a sign that things are on track with the U.S.-German relationship?
I think the things will never be back on the track we have seen before. I mean, times are past. The new German chancellor is in the situation that he has to cooperate with the American president, and he tries that. And on some instances it will work, on others it will not. But he has to try. In case of Ukraine, the Europeans can try to come back into the game, play a role, but it will not work without the United States. So they have to work with the American president, which is difficult, will be difficult, but you still have to do it.
Yeah. Now, also in Istanbul, I understand that the new German foreign minister, Johann Vadaful, will be meeting with, or has met as you watch this, with Secretary of State Marco Rubio in Turkey. What would your expectations be coming out of this meeting?
Well, I think the signal from Germany will be we are ready to do more, to pay more. There is talk about 5% GDP for defense. That's the request from the United States. That's the request from the American president. And I think the German signals will be, we heard that message and we want NATO to stay alive. And we're going to do whatever it takes to make that happen.
Even if it means 5%?
In one way
GDP?
or the other. I don't think we will see really 5% soon, but I think there will be some work with the figures, so it looks like 5%.
Okay. So regardless of what happens in Turkey, we should say, as I've said, a new alliance does appear to be taking shape in Europe, and that could help shift the balance of power when it comes to the war in Ukraine. Let's take a closer look now at what could be a stronger, united European foreign policy.
Unconventional, surprising and swift. This is how the new European foreign policy could look. German Chancellor Merz, French President Macron and British Prime Minister Starmer on their way to a joint mission. Together with Polish President Tusk, they visited Ukraine last weekend and met with President Zelensky. They want to express solidarity and put pressure on Putin. It is of paramount importance that the political West, ladies and gentlemen, does not allow itself to be divided. And that is why I will continue to make every effort to achieve the greatest possible unity between our European and American partners. Donald Trump and many other heads of state and government joined the Kyiv conference via cell phone. Their message to Moscow: we stand together as a coalition of the willing.
We are here also to demonstrate that Europe, our countries, the whole West, that we are ready to sacrifice a lot to support you, because your fight is our fight.
Will Europe take the leading role in the future peace negotiations with Ukraine?
And let's pass that question directly on to Kate. In the future, can Europe play a leading role in brokering an end to the war?
I think absolutely, and this isn't, about necessarily just ending the war, as huge as that is, but this is about the future as well of Europe's security and defence going forward. And I think what we're seeing is the start of a real kind of central, smaller team within not just the European Union, but for the continent of Europe that is going to have to work together to secure that, with the thought in mind that, the US might not always be there. But at the same time, we're seeing an improvement, of course, when it comes to unity here between those leaders, whether it's in the Weimar Triangle between Germany, France and Poland. Now we have that kind of Weimar Plus, as they're calling it, as well, with additional states. But it is going to be difficult without the support as well from the US. But the big question as well is the credibility of these European leaders. And we saw earlier this week the demand, the threat even put on the table of, if Putin doesn't accept, or by the end of the day, Monday, doesn't enforce the Waffenstillstand, ceasefire. Then then it will be then there will be more sanctions, and they didn't follow through on that. And so I think as that keeps being delayed, their credibility is going to be brought more and more into question.
Is going to be waning here. Miriam, I'm curious, when you look at the UK, when you look at Germany, France, and Poland among this core group of leaders, is there someone in a leading role among these four states here when it comes to negotiations over Ukraine?
They bring in different crucial aspects, and this is something that will need to be worked with well. I'm, of course, thinking about France as a nuclear power, UK too, but there are differences in how they can contribute to deterrence. It will be simply important that they work together well. I do not like the term coalition of the willing. Coalition of the determined, somebody brought in, is, I think, quite fitting. And I think it is a bit unfortunate, or very unfortunate, that the ceasefire demand did not go through. But in the end, it is also because Trump then, as Daniel said, he will remain Trump, will remain difficult, and he reached out and kind of like destroyed the ultimatum by suggesting or going for these talks in Turkey. But this is what the leaders, the Europeans, will need to work with, and I think they did it considerably well in terms of how the circumstances are. So I think the potential is there to carry this forward.
Let's get the view from Alexei, since this keeps coming up as an issue in the background here, which side Trump will actually end up taking, whether it's Europe's side, whether it's Putin's side. How important would you say American support is for any European plan?
It is, of course, essential. I think the term strategic ambiguity has reached its peak with President Trump, right? And so, absurdly enough, no one actually knows that, neither Europe nor Russia. And this brings, again, absurdly enough, then a dynamic into this beginning negotiation, which is open-ended. I wouldn't also write off the ceasefire as something that might happen. I mean, there is a significant fundamental difference in sequencing. And for the Ukrainian side, it is a deal breaker to start with. For the Russian side, it's nuances. This is the official word that was used by presidential spokesperson Peskov. But it doesn't mean that it's not in the making or it's not possible. I would rather say that the European power is not one of actually initiative, it's a power of veto, because there is no solution that works without the Europeans as well. You could very much put it vice versa. Sure, the Europeans need Americans to reassure, to also fill the gaps in terms of security provision if the Europeans are to reassure Ukraine. But on the other side, I mean, we all remember 2022, 2023, nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine was the slogan, was the motto. Now it's nothing about Ukraine and Europe without Ukraine and Europe. So this new constellation where on both sides of the continent, be it in Moscow or in DC, there are actors who are not by nature allies, or at least there is, significant shadow over the transatlantic relationship between the Europeans and the Americans. I think the European position and the Ukrainian position has come closer together than before. And it's on both levels. On the levels of instrument, the Russian side, for example, which views the normalization, again, I'm quoting, of US-Russia relations as one track, and the cessation of hostilities in Ukraine is a different track. They asked Trump to exclude one of the Russian state's agrarian banks from the sanction list. Trump cannot do it without the Europeans. SWIFT is in Europe. There is a governance mechanism. So the Europeans have chips to negotiate with. And on the larger level, again, the maximum aim of the Kremlin is not just the de-sovereignization of Ukraine, it's also to rewrite rules of how the European order works. So the Europeans have a lot of veto in all of those steps of negotiations, and I hope that we'll see that they actually use it and not just, look at the transatlantic unity as their only resource.
Yeah, Daniel, how could they use it? What can the Europeans actually do to pressure Putin? I think Alexei just alluded there to the sanctions that EU ambassadors have now agreed on. It's the 17th package, and it's targeting almost 200 ships. part of so-called shadow fleet.
I totally agree with what Alexei said, but the one problem is that the power that Europeans don't have is to support Ukraine in a way it can sustain the war with Russia. That is the problem. They need the United States to protect Ukraine. Without the United States, there is no war on the Ukrainian side. That is the problem. But I agree, there is a power of veto. Economically, the Europeans are the decisive power. There will be no reconstruction in Ukraine without Europe. As far as we're talking about sanctions, I think the Europeans are essential here too. But they have to show it. They have to prove it. If it is necessary, even have to try to put pressure on the United States to force it to say we need to put pressure on Putin too. And this is the big question. There was sort of an ultimatum saying we need a ceasefire now. We saw the reaction of Putin here. So I think in the next couple of days or weeks, the Europeans have to prove that they're not only a little bit part of the game, but they're really maybe not in the driver's seat, but at least near the driver's seat here.
Yeah, Miriam, I'm curious about energy specifically here. It's something that's been in conversation since Russia's full-scale invasion, and why the EU is still sending so much money to Russia for its energy needs. We had a report this year that found that the bloc is still spending more on Russian fossil fuels than it is spending on financial aid to Ukraine. How is that possibly still the dynamic in 2025?
Because that is for many the breaking point between own economic drawbacks and European unity. Slovakia, Hungary, but also I think the EU is still importing 20% of its gas. I'm talking about LNG, liquefied gas. And only now the EU has been developing this roadmap to phase out of this energy consumption. But then we speak about 2027, which is quite a while. So in that respect, the EU is not fast enough. The Russian central bank assets that are in Belgium, most of it is another crucial part, because in order to keep them, you need Hungary's consent. For now, you have it. But this is something that the EU could very well use to put much more pressure on Russia as it is now. But I agree with Daniel. Even for sanctions, you do need the US, because if Russia sells its resources to India, for example, and sanctions circumvention is another issue. If this group really concerts its action, then it can have effect in terms of putting Putin really into a corner. For now, he has no reason to give in, which is tragic for Ukraine, because if this is continued, there will not be a truce.
Let's have a closer look at that, because, of course, as Miriam mentions, the key component to any lasting peace for Ukraine will ultimately be Russia's willingness to negotiate. So let's take a look at where things stand for them now.
Kremlin leader Vladimir Putin. For more than 3 years, he has been drowning neighboring Ukraine in war, death, and misery. Will the war come to an end only on his terms? A dictated peace that Ukraine and its supporters cannot accept? Putin relishes displays of power with powerful people, like here at the military parade in Moscow on May 9th, celebrating the victory over Nazi Germany. He ignores the demand of the coalition of the willing in Europe for an immediate ceasefire. Russia has previously repeatedly put forward initiatives for a ceasefire. However, those initiatives were sabotaged time and again by the Ukrainian side. Russia's president isn't bothered by the new sanctions. He doesn't take the EU seriously. Is peace in Ukraine only possible with Donald Trump's mediation?
So, Alexei, let's come to you. Is it still in Russia's interests to be stalling any negotiations for peace?
I think we need to see that although there is no necessarily a hunger for a truce at the moment, I mean, Russia is winning on the battlefield. It is costly, it is bloody, it does cost a lot of resources, it has implications for domestic stability, but it is working for Vladimir Putin at the current moment. The Russian Federation has figured out how to wage a war and at the same time maintain macroeconomic stability and a high level of consent, not necessarily support, but consent in its society. So if the talks fail, Russia can continue for a year, 2, maybe 3. There are limits to that, limits of how many men Russia can mobilize, limits to its macroeconomic stability are already showing. For example, we have the first quarter of this year, which sectorally speaking, if we deduct the arms industry, is in recession. So this hype of Russian economy, which was pumped full of state money to produce weapons, is actually coming to an end. But Russia has more time than Ukraine. And so, as has been mentioned by others here, it's a question of how much pain is acceptable and bearable, actually, to the Ukrainian side. And this is an open question, so I cannot judge it. I think the European leaders also have to rely on Kyiv and its own assessment. But obviously, Russia is losing slowlier, so Ukraine is losing more quicker. Everyone is losing at this war. So coming back to a question, I think it's possible that Moscow is exploring how much of a beneficial outcome this window of opportunity which Donald Trump creates can actually be achieved, because they also don't know. They don't know whether the window is closing and by the midterms, and as soon as President Trump loses interest, their possibility to maybe actually safeguard territorial and political successes will be gone, and they will have to fight on. And so on those different levels of ambition, the lowest aim of Kremlin at the moment is to synchronize its annexation ambitions, because territories that are annexed are not actually in factual control by the Russian forces, and to force Kyiv to at least tolerate, internationally speaking, this. This is the lowest level. And so as long as this is not in the sheets and not working, Russia will continue.
And Kate, timing-wise for the Europeans, could this also be a window of opportunity? I mean, we've heard of some fairly pessimistic outlooks on the one hand, but if there were ever a moment to find a deal, do you see the chances as better now than they have been in the past?
We're certainly closer than we have been in the past, but, you know, without being able to actually bring both Putin and Zelensky together to the table, I just don't see how that happens, which is why, in the meantime, the Europeans, in cooperation with the US, have to put on the pressure wherever they can.
Yeah, I do just want to come back to the dynamics within this European leadership, because it is going to be such an important and crucial part of whatever is to come. Daniel, and specifically some of the interpersonal dynamics, the Franco-German relationship, of course, key. We've had Macron talking for years about strategic economy. Do you think he has found in the new Chancellor Merz, a German Chancellor, who will help make that possible?
I think, yes, both want that. I mean, they want a new beginning, and what they showed last couple of days tells us that it might work. I still think that there are different interests sometimes, and that we're going to see that all the problems we saw between France and Germany were due to Olaf Scholz, and that he did not get along with Emmanuel Macron. The thinking is very different in Paris and Berlin, and it will stay different. But they both know they have to work together. If it doesn't work with Germany and France, it will not work in Europe. That has always been true, but it's very true right now.
And Kate, what about the UK? Is it seeking to reassert itself under a new Labour government in the wake of Brexit as an important player among the Europeans?
I mean, I think what we're seeing is kind of what Labour had always looked towards in terms of its foreign policy, to Keir Starmer's party, the Labour Party, in terms of, you know, closer, kind of improving ties to the European Union again. And it's interesting to see how Starmer has presented himself, especially by hosting the talks in London as well, as a key figure in these talks. And of course, the UK finds itself in a difficult position too, as with the rest of Europe, we're not. There's a lot of issues on the table here. Of course, when the European leaders as a whole, I'm talking about Europe and not the EU, are trying to keep the Trump on board whilst also dealing with the tariffs crisis and the trade and the threat of a trade war. And so there's a lot of balancing acts to go on right now. And maybe it is to in Starmer's favour that he's managed to close this deal, this trade deal with the US, which might also win some points in keeping Trump close to European allies on this issue. So there's a lot of intertwined issues here at play.
Yeah, let's get some final thoughts, Miriam. A European, I know you don't like this term, but a European coalition of the willing. Are they also the willing and able to get something done?
It depends on how they continue now, because Putin has spoken about having to go back to the roots of the conflict with respect to Istanbul after he wriggled out of a direct meeting with Zelensky. And these are his code words for Russia sticking to its old maximalist approaches. And this is the so-called denazification, no defense support to Ukraine. And this is not possible. Security guarantees are the breaking point, and the coalition of the determineds, as I would like to call them, will need to figure out how to provide these security guarantees to Ukraine.
All right, let's see what the coalition of the determined can do. Thank you so much to my amazing panel today. We've been speaking with Daniel Brössler, Miriam, Kosmehl, Kate Brady, and Alexei Yusupov in Riga. I'm Claire Richardson in Berlin. If you enjoyed our show today, leave us a comment on YouTube if that's where you're watching. Otherwise, I will see you next time. Thank you so much for taking the time.